Welcome, everybody. I am Connie Ryan, and I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. And this is What's Happening. It is our weekly broadcast where we talk about a whole range of issues with a lot of different leaders in our state. And I'm really glad that you have joined us for What's Happening. And if you want, you can put comments and ask questions and put those in the comment section, either on Facebook or YouTube. And we will hopefully have time to get to those if you ask any. And I'm just glad that you are with us today. And I'm really glad to have Representative Lindsay James, who is a Democrat from the Dubuque area. And she has just been named as the House Minority Whip. And so we wanted to be able to have a conversation with her. Welcome, Representative James. Thanks for being on What's Happening.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was very excited to receive this invitation and then excited to engage in a conversation.
Yeah. And so tell folks, if they're not from the upper northeast corner of the state and Dubuque area, et cetera, or like totally engaged in legislative work, they may not know very much about you. So tell folks a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, your family, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone out there on the internet world. I am, yes, Lindsay James, state representative in northeastern Iowa. I represent half of the city of Dubuque, right on the river. And of course, it will change shortly as we are doing redistricting maps, which I'm sure will be a point of conversation later in our conversation. But the brief history about who I am. I actually am an Iowa transplant. So my husband and I came with our young kids for a job here. He's a professor at the University of Dubuque, and he teaches theology. So this is actually, it's really fun to be in a conversation with you, Connie, because the work that you do is really incredible in your organization. And so it's kind of fun to make those connections between, faith and public life and what that looks like. So he's a professor. And then a little bit about my background. I am actually an ordained Presbyterian pastor. And I have spent the bulk of my career as a college chaplain, so doing interreligious work on college campuses. So working with students who, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, even the atheist student group was kind of under my purview. And so it was, beautiful experience working with a diversity of religious perspectives and, always an attempt to bring people together across difference and figure out how to live best with one another in the midst of that. So that is a little bit about my background. And Connie, I should tell you this. I think you'll appreciate this story. So I had a family rule in my household that we could not discuss at the dinner table religion or politics. Those were off limits. And so I like to point out to people that I'm like the ultimate rebellion to my family system. Because here I went and, studied theology and, deeply involved in the religious community. And then, of course, later in life, went into politics. And so my poor parents, we just got to make sure that they have some good therapy sessions as they're trying to navigate religion and politics alongside of me. So
that is awesome. And it's so funny because I say that all the time about Interfaith Alliance, that and I use that example of the dinner table and say, we are the epitome of what you're not supposed to do. We talk about religion and politics and the mix therein that can be messy at times. But so tell folks then, you've been in the legislature now. This is your second term.
Yes.
And tell folks how you decided to jump into politics and kind of what was the motivating factors for that.
Yeah, well, I do have to say they're all, as you were saying, it's all deeply connected and messy.
Yeah.
So I actually, had done chaplaincy work all of my career. And one of the things that I found was the most uniting experience when bringing people together across different faith traditions was interreligious dialogue and service. And so I would help facilitate discussions amongst different religious perspectives. And then we would together go serve in the community. And I had a deeply profound experience. Actually, I was working with a student group out of California at Stanford University. And one of the things that we did was I took a van of students from this Ivy League college. We left campus in a van and we just drove, around our neighborhood and around the perimeters and over, into the city nearby just to observe the differences. And one of the things that was so deeply profound in that experience with these students, all from different religious perspectives, was how when they left their college campus and when they left kind of this like very wealthy, prestigious area, that just a mile down the road was, you cross over the train tracks and, into deep poverty and, from perfectly manicured mansions, and lawns and, just a lot of privilege into a neighboring city that had a lot of poverty, a lot of racial divide. And, the students began to wrestle with what does it mean for me to live out my faith and actually in a public way. So how do we address the problems and the challenges that our cities are facing? And what is our commitment to them as people of faith? And so we started to wrestle with that question together. And so that is the question that I'm always wrestling with people in my lives. And it just was a natural transition into politics from there. But Connie, to be very specific about your question, it was in 2016. It was after the presidential election, and I'm sitting at the breakfast table with my daughter, and I'm kind of stumbling my way around a conversation with her about who our next president was. And I was shocked when she, I told her that, our next president in 2016 was going to be Donald Trump. And the first thing out of her mouth was a question. She said, "Mom, does this mean we have to build a wall?" And she was 6 years old at the time. And so you can imagine a 6-year-old who, is able to ask that kind of a question and with that kind of concern. And that was the moment where I had a deep sense of, maybe some of the skill sets that I've learned in a religious context could translate into a political one. And so I kind of had this moment, before God where I was like, okay, if a seat like this opens, I'm going to run for it. And then a seat like this opened and I was like, oh no, what have I done? What have I done? And so I clung to my courage and I threw my name in for that particular race for the state house, and I won. And now I am going into my 4th year. So I'm in my 2nd term, going into my 4th year at the legislature.
What an amazing story in both of those pieces, both with your students and your daughter. As a mom, I don't know how I would have reacted to a 6-year-old asking that kind of profound question. And so good for you. And so obviously, as you've talked, people have gotten a feeling of how important your faith is to you, but also how important of being involved and enmeshed in politics and making a difference in that regard. And so sometimes I would imagine your faith and specifically your religion may come into conflict with politics and what's happening at the state house. And there could be that conflict. And so how do you resolve that when you know that you have taken an oath to serve the people of Iowa, particularly your district, but also you have this calling of your faith as a Presbyterian pastor? So how do you resolve that?
Yeah. It's been interesting. Living out my faith and being a politician has been certainly a challenging experience, but also something that feels like a very natural extension of who I am and who we are. So it is kind of in some ways challenging, but also very much so feels congruent with, how I live out my faith commitments. But I wanted to I'll tell you one quick story. It was in my 1st term at the legislature, and another legislator who for those of you who are watching, I affiliate with the Democratic Party. I am a Democrat. And so when I'm referencing my political affiliation, I just thought I'd make sure you knew where I landed there. But I had a colleague of mine in, the party across the aisle. He's Republican, also a Presbyterian elder. So, here I am, a Presbyterian minister, and he is a Presbyterian elder. And we had a really candid conversation. And he said to me, "Lindsay, I just don't understand how you can be a Christian and a Democrat.
Wow.
And right, I know. Thank you for that response, because right, it feels to me very much so that my political affiliation is congruent with my faith commitments, especially around the Christian commitment for the common good, and for those who are on the margins of society. And so I was able to share with him an example of that, and how it does feel very congruent to me. In that regard, but when it comes to actual day-to-day, some of the challenges are, how do I have conversations with political conversations with my friends at church? Right, that could be always or when religion and politics come up, how I have to be very careful. So those are the challenging pieces of, I want to respect where everyone is at. And I have a deep sense of, God moving in all of us. And we are all in a journey, and we have different starting places in that journey, and are all in different places on that journey. And so wanting to be very respectful, especially when I'm in a religious context, to be making sure to honor people's journey, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. It does to me, and I'm sure it does to the folks who are listening. And so you were recently elected in your caucus in the House.
Yes.
As the House Minority Whip.
Right.
Not everybody probably knows what that means. So tell folks a little bit about what a House Minority Whip is, but also maybe what some of your goals are in that role and as a legislator to move issues forward, particularly in that role.
Sure. So the whip traditionally, when you think about the whip tradition, it is someone who helps whip votes and make sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to, the issues that we're voting on. Because the Democrats are in the minority party, the whip looks a lot different, right? Because it is very rare when, we need to all stand firm on one or two votes or issues. Although it is really beautiful, actually. Our caucus, the values are so deeply, connected to how we vote that we tend to be pretty consistent with one another in making sure that, the least, the lost, the lonely, those are on the margins of society, that we're legislating for them with the common good in mind. So I've been very proud of that in our caucus. So my role in the caucus looks a little bit different, and it's still kind of getting hammered out, if you will. But I am really passionate about how our votes and our values are translating back to our districts. And so one of the things that we are prioritizing as a caucus is what we call, and this is the political side of things, incumbent protection. So how do we protect our members when they are in their seats and keeping their seats? I think of it less as protection and more of, how do we help them make connections with their community to a greater degree? So our votes communicate our values, but sometimes, people's lives are way too busy to understand what we're voting on and how we're voting. And so our ability to get that message out is sometimes challenging. And so I am going to spend my time as the minority whip really thinking about our votes and our values and how we can help our incumbents, our members, translate that back to their district. And then how do we help them, learn more deeply about the needs of their own community.
That is awesome. And I think everybody can use a little help in that area of just being able to communicate. So I'm going to shift us a little bit and talk about redistricting. You mentioned that earlier. And the Senate, so we had the first map come up. The Senate took that, voted it down, so the House didn't even get to have a say in it at all. So we'll be having a second map probably come out this week. The prediction is or the goal, I guess, is to have it come out this week. You all have a scheduled second special session on October 28th. What are Democrats looking for in that? Should the House Democrats get to have a say on any of this? What are you looking for in a redistricting map? Kind of what are the goals? What are the priorities as you assess the different congressional and legislative districts?
Yeah, sure. So the goal always is fairness. We want fair maps. And part of what I wanted to point out, and for those of you who are tuning in, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the redistricting process. So I'll give you like the quick 101. Is that okay, Connie? A quick 101. Okay. So essentially, we have a nonpartisan process. We're actually the gold standard when it comes to redistricting across the country. People look to Iowa as the gold standard because we are deeply invested in a nonpartisan, fair process. So what that means is that we, both Democrats and Republicans, put forward people to be on an independent commission, and there's equal numbers of Republicans, equal numbers of Democrats, and the tie-breaking vote is a chairperson who is agreed upon by both Democrat and Republican. And so that we've kind of created a non-bias commission to take a look at the maps. And so what happens is we have a nonpartisan LSA staff who essentially uses software to run 1,000 different maps, which sounds like a lot, and it is. And then based on the software and the parameters of the law, it produces a fairness score. And then the non-partisan staff puts that forward, those maps forward to the commission, and then they choose out of that 1,000 what they believe is the most fair and makes most sense for the state of Iowa. So we do that. We did that first round, and that map was rejected, and so we redraw another 1,000 maps and go through that process again. So 1,000 different maps into to put forward map 2. And that if that is voted down, then we go do that process all over again into map 3. So, and then at that point, if map 3 can be amended based on the legal parameters, but part of what we want to emphasize is we don't want to change any of those districts, because when politicians start picking their people, it becomes really problematic, because democracy is about people picking who they want to represent them, not the other way around. And so, so my concern always is, will on the third map, the Republicans who have the majority in the legislature gerrymander that map? And so that's always a concern. I, however, am a person who likes to give people the benefit of the doubt and give them every opportunity to do the right thing. And so, I certainly, it is unprecedented that we have ever gone to the third map. We've only gone to the second map. So I am hopeful that we will accept this second map and, move through, because of it being a fair, nonpartisan process. So the value is always, to answer your very specific question, Connie, fairness, and upholding a fair process.
Thank you. And I think that's very helpful to have that description, and helpful to folks. And even if, and we have addressed that issue a couple of different times over the last year, but it is helpful when folks are not totally immersed in all of this to hear it time and again. And so thank you. I appreciate your going through that and your expertise on that.
And can I add one more thing, Connie, that I think is important to this conversation?
You bet.
The public can weigh in about the fairness of maps. And the public did do that in round 1. Because round 2 is more expedited, they don't go through that process. But I did want to note one thing, Connie, on the first map. A lot of people talked about how District 4, so this is a congressional district, so the maps draw congressional districts and all of our legislative districts. But District 4 swallowed a huge portion of our state. And a lot of people said, that's not fair. How is it that District 4 has so much territory? But the redistricting process is based off of population. And so actually what we are seeing with that over the last 10 years since the last census is that we've had significant population drain out of rural Iowa. Yeah. So, all the western part of our state is, population drain out of that area. And so that's why that kind of took on a bigger, and I think we'll see that again in map 2. It will be another very large territory, although it's still comparable population wise.
Yeah, and I think it was stunning when I looked at the map the first time. It was stunning to see that, but it also told a story, right? When you look at that picture, it is because of that drain from our rural districts and our rural areas. And so, yes, it was a massive amount of land.
Yes.
It was not a massive, it was an equal amount of population. And so each of those counties have just lost so many people and going to either more urban areas in Iowa or simply, leaving the state as well. And so I think it tells a story about where Iowa is and needing to pay attention to that in the future as well, beyond congressional districts. So there's my philosophy 101.
Leave it to you to dive into the story. Right. What is the story behind all of the data? I love it.
Right. So it's going to be fascinating when we get to the second map. And as I said, it should come out later this week of what that looks like. And there still will be, I'm quite sure, a district that is tipped in terms of land mass, but not tipped in terms of population. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch us up again and go to public education. And we know that public education really has taken a lot of hits over the last year, but really last several years. And this year we saw challenges based on critical race theory, which is not really a thing in K-12 education, but we saw that in the 1619 project. We saw challenges, of course, over the last several years over funding. We obviously have seen challenges in terms of masks and vaccines, and that's actually also floated down to school board races as well. And so there's this division really in terms of public education and this tension that we are seeing. And so why do you think public education has really been put into the midst of this and that tension that has happened, that division that has happened? And how do we move beyond that? And you always have such a optimistic outlook on how things can happen, but how do we move beyond that fighting that we're seeing and public education being smack in the middle of it?
Right. It is smack in the middle, right in the middle. And I have some ideas of why I think that is, and it but I'd be interested too to hear your perspective, Connie, and your viewers who are tuning in and who are part of this organization. It'd be interesting to hear your perspectives as well. But I think there is nothing more visceral for humans than protecting their kids. And one of the interesting things, actually, I'll tell you this, Connie, because I think this is appropriate to this unique community. But my husband was talking about how when he does his research, there was a time where families felt deeply committed to making sure that their children marry people who are within the same faith tradition, and wanted their children to stay within the same faith tradition. And that ranked very high, in terms of the set of values. And, he was recently talking to me about the shift from that commitment to a political commitment. And so there was a sense of, people who are raising children that they would continue to carry on their political values. And I think that part of what we see happening is that when we're thinking about our kids, we're getting to that kind of human visceral instinct of wanting to make sure that they maintain whatever family values, that those remain unquestioning and, that they continue those on. So I think that's part of why things like critical race theory, or even whether or not students wear masks. I have yet to meet a student who is deeply opinionated about whether or not to wear a mask. When presented with an option and, some common sense, tends to be it's no big deal. But for a lot of parents, there seems to be if we take this step, then are we spiraling into dangerous territory? So I think there's just a lot of fear around those kinds of things. And I think that the politicians do not help this polarization in any way when we drum up, continued, and I shouldn't say we, I don't believe that I do fear mongering, but there is a lot of fear mongering that happens in politics. And it is something that I think the boogeymans that are being put forward are not there. I mean, critical race theory isn't taught in our K through 12 system, right? And so to make that assertion and that claim, and then to, make it so politically divisive, I think is really problematic. And, our kids need to be able to be kids. They need to be able to learn in a safe environment, and they need to be able to learn how to think critically and ask questions and wrestle with different concepts. And I think our teachers do that really well. And so when we polarize and politicize, what they're doing, it just makes their job exponentially harder. What are you seeing, Connie? I know your schools it's happening everywhere, right?
Yeah, it is happening across the state. And, we referenced earlier school board and school board candidates, and we're seeing candidates in all areas of the state that are running on some of these divisive issues, and whether it's masks or vaccines or race and racism and all of those pieces. And I do think that a lot of it is driven by fear. I think you're exactly right. And I also think that it is micromanagement. So it is fear that then drives the strategy of micromanagement. And we're seeing that, as I said, with school board members who want to, or school board candidates who want to decide what's actually taught in the classroom, and how administrators should run their schools, et cetera, rather than looking at, broader public policy that's for the common good, as you referenced earlier. So I think it is very complicated. And so, yeah.
And I do think it's important to know too that I think going forward, it's not going to get any easier. I think, let us hope that we turn a corner with COVID, and when we do turn that corner, if and when, let's hope, I think then it will be another thing, like CRT will be another big boogeyman that kind of comes up. And I think that, if we allow these issues to continue to polarize our schools, it's going to be harder to recruit and retain teachers. I mean, any industry, when a profession knows that they have a target on their back, why would you go into it? I mean, we pay our teachers too little. I mean, they do not make enough for the work that they do and the investment in the next generation, right? I mean, there's the most important work. And so, there is a lot of unintended consequences of continuing to polarize our schools and politicize our schools that, we'll see.
Yeah, and there also has already been a shortage of teachers, and particularly substitute teachers, and so the schools are feeling it and feeling the pain and the backlash, if you will, of all of these things that are happening societally. And so beyond the schools, that's a big piece of the division and kind of how it has played out. But also there's been a lot of divisive legislation over the last several years, whether it's LGBTQ issues. We saw 15 anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation this last year, and that was just this one year. And to remind folks, all of that legislation continues to be active in the second half of the General Assembly, so in 2022. Reproductive health care, other legislation around race and racism, just a whole lot of really extreme legislation. And so my question really is about how do we, as progressives, fight back against that? And obviously the Democrats have a minority in both the House and Senate, and significant minority. But progressive advocates still play a role in this.
Oh, absolutely.
Still can use their voices. So how do we fight back on these issues that we care so deeply about because of our values that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, well, I think we're at a critical turning point in our state. I think that if we take our foot off the gas, we will continue to lose ground. And so this is the time now where we actually need people around us in a more significant way. There is always power in people's collective voice. I mean, that's what we see with unions and the power of unions when we come together around an issue and advocate. The sheer numbers mean that issue cannot be ignored. And so right now, what we really need is people to engage in a more significant way. Now, I want to say this. Probably the people who are tuning in here are heroes in their communities. I mean, you're already engaging, you're already doing the work. Now it's the challenge of trying to think critically about how do I help bring people along in that. And so I think this group that's listening, you're engaged and you're rock stars, and the foundation that you've laid has helped us all along the way make sure that we can block harmful legislation and advance positive, helpful things for our state. So thank you. And now it's just trying to figure out, how do I bring my neighbor, my family members, my kids, whoever else along in the midst of this. And I think this is the time, Connie, where I tell people we have to be brave, really brave, in a more significant way when it comes to those hard conversations with family and friends, and take stands and let people know where we're at in our progressive policies. Because when you can voice that and people say, I really like Connie Ryan, she is smart, what she said, I agree, and then there, continues a really positive ripple effect. And then I always just say, Connie, when there is an issue at the table, so let's say there's a piece of harmful legislation around LGBTQIA plus, community. If you live in Des Moines, I like to think of Rolodex who throughout the state, that friend from high school that moved into Western Iowa, your former neighbor who moved to Southern Iowa, or your family members, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles who live all across the state. Rolodex those individuals. And then I say, help them, if you can, go onto the legislative website, get their address and put it in to find out who their legislator is, and help them make that natural connection. I know that I've been doing that work with residents living in manufactured housing communities. We have been trying to touch into different parks across the state and organize those into neighborhood associations. And we've managed to organize 7 parks in the last year, which is great. We have many, many, many more to go. But it's, if you can Rolodex your networks and then reach out to them and help them reach out to their legislator, it makes a difference.
That is amazing, and fabulous organizing work. And I want to ask you briefly about the UAW strike. And I know that you told me earlier you have a John Deere plant in your district, and so tell us a little bit about how those folks are doing, and if there are ways that they can help to support the UAW workers.
Sure. So again, I'd say this is a time to be brave, and this is what those workers are doing. I mean, it is a scary thing to walk off your job site, especially when that is the means in which you keep a house, a roof over the heads of your kids and food on the table, and make sure that you have a good life. And so that is a scary thing for a lot of these workers. But they have a deep sense of knowing what is good and right and just in a fair workplace. And part of what we're seeing is that, during this pandemic, John Deere has had exponential profits, more than they have ever seen. And those profits are on the back of their workers. Those profits are only possible because men and women show up day in and day out to the factory floor to get that work done. And so they deserve a piece of, those profits. They have built that company with the executives. And so to see an executive walk away with 160% increase in their pay raise and workers still struggling to take all of their vacation time. So here's just a great example, Connie, is, when you have 4 weeks of vacation pay a year, that's great, right? That's a great benefit. Except that if, the orders keep coming in and there's not enough workers to fill those orders, then that that worker doesn't actually get to take those 4 weeks, right? They don't actually get to live into that benefit because they have to come in and fulfill those orders, and so it becomes a difficult work-life balance in that regard. And, and the workers have said enough. We need that to have a healthy and thriving life. And dignity in the workplace is one of the most important things that we can offer one another, respecting and appreciating the contributions that we're putting forward. And so I am really proud of these brave workers for doing that. So I had an opportunity to go down a couple days ago and meet with our local president, as well as some of our UAW workers. They're jazzed. I mean, they're afraid, there's fear, there's, what next, because it's unknown, but they're also jazzed to say we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. We're a part of fighting for justice for working families. And so they're excited. But I do think one of the most important things we could talk about on this is, as these negotiations drag out, let's hope that they don't drag out too long, that Deere comes back to the table and does the right thing on behalf of their workers. But as it drags on, it gets a lot harder for these workers. Strike pay is not their normal income, right? Workers will often talk about, needing to come to the union hall to pick up eggs and bread and cheese, that if this goes on for months and months, and the last UAW strike, Deere strike, was 9 months long. That was 35 years ago. So this could actually be a very long negotiation process, in which case we will need religious communities and different community members and organizations to really step up and say, how do we make sure that these workers have food on their table? If they're renting, that they're making their rent payments, that they can pay for whatever hospital bills or, medical bills that arise. So I think we'll have, as a community, a lot of support that we'll need to pour out over the long haul if this does get dragged out.
Thank you for that, and do keep us apprised of where folks can help, and we'll try and make sure folks have information as well. Very much appreciate it. I read recently an article where it talked about, of the countries that are developed and have union tradition, that United States has one of the smallest numbers of unions and union members in the industrial first world countries, like 10%, and I think it's Iceland has like 90% of its population are union members, and so we have a lot of work to do to remember also the history of unions in our country and what they have brought over the years, and many of the laws that we have to protect workers who are not unionized. Those laws came because of unions. And so a lot of work, and I should have somebody on to talk about unions, and maybe we'll do that.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, one of the more impactful pieces of data for me when talking about unions is the Economic Policy Institute puts out a map that shows that where union density is higher in an area, wages are higher, right? Because it is the work that they are doing to lift up their union that ends up lifting up everybody around them. So it's a pretty powerful, profound map when you think about the role of unions in terms of advocacy for working families all across the country. It's pretty cool.
And that notion of lifting all boats.
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. So we've talked about some different pieces. What is it that you would love to, if you had the magic ball and had power and all of that, what are you going to be working on, and what would you love to see actually pass in the coming legislative session?
Oh my gosh, if I could. Do you have a whole afternoon that we can just dream and talk about the possibilities in our state? I think
maybe shorten the list a little bit.
I know, Connie, can I just tell you that one of the biggest frustrations as someone I've not been in the legislature very long, so this is going into my second term. And the most frustrating thing for me is that the legislature is talking about boogeymen and issues that have no real weight on our state thriving. And the focus is so backwards to me. I mean, if you think about where our state is at, we have some real significant challenges in front of us. We have a $4 billion water quality problem in front of us. We have population drain out of the rural parts of our state, but we also have population drain, or what is called brain drain, young people leaving our state. We have families, so many families who are in poverty or on the brink of poverty, that, a $400 unexpected expense, a car breaks down, there's a medical bill, a kid has a need, that could actually cause them to be homeless and out on the streets, and not making it. So we have families who are struggling with good wages, and a whole lot of other issues in our state. And we're not talking about that as a legislature. We're not talking about the fact that I mentioned manufactured housing communities. We have 30,000 residents who live in manufactured housing community. 60,000 residents. I believe it's 60,000. I'm going to go double check that data piece, but it's a lot of residents living in manufactured housing communities in our state. And we have these out-of-state corporations that are coming in and price gouging them. They're predatory companies and are going to be displacing families. And some of those families are veterans and seniors living on a fixed income and single moms, people with disabilities. That's a piece of the affordable housing equation, is these manufactured housing communities. And we're displacing people out of them. And so for me, we're not talking about as a state, any of these, or the fact that we used to be, Connie, see, now you're going to get me really going. I mean, education, right? I mean, we used to be top in the nation in terms of innovation and quality of education because we funded our schools. I mean, what a novel idea. We invested in the future of our state by investing in our schools and our kids. And so, Connie, if I was running the state, yes, right, we would be investing in our state. We'd be investing in the infrastructure, the education, and we would be having the hard conversations about the challenges our state is facing. So why are our kids leaving? Why are our young people leaving? Why are people, just running out of rural Iowa? How do we fix our water quality program? How do we do all of these things that are vitally important for our state, the longevity of our state? So those are the conversations I'd be having, and, rolling up my sleeves to dig into those.
Yeah. And, and sometimes we have those conversations for years and years. Like, I know the conversation around broadband,
Yes.
It's not an issue that we have advocated on, give or take, over those years, but I hang out at the Capitol, so you hear those conversations, and, year after year after year. Well, y'all did a little bit of work on that this last year. And so hopefully we continue to improve that, particularly in rural areas and in inner city areas that don't have access. And if COVID taught us anything, it's that broadband is critically important. Healthcare systems, that's mental health systems, all of those pieces of infrastructure that make people's lives livable and better.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I appreciate the work. And I what I really appreciate about you, Representative James, is how you marry your values with the work that you want to accomplish, and just your positive energy also. So
thank you. I am a redhead, so I get a little bit feisty.
Redheads unite.
That was right. Yes. Yeah.
My last question for you is, and then we'll wrap this up, but we have a lot of advocates that watch this either live or the recording of it. Tell folks how you think that they can make it. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but how they can make a difference in using their voice, and kind of those best things that you see out there, that how advocates can do their work.
Yeah, sure. Well, can I say this? I'd love to tell a quick story about why I think this is so important. So I actually, in my district, when I first ran, I knocked about 10,000 doors, and I heard pretty powerful stories of the realities people are facing in their everyday lives. One gentleman who said to me when we were talking about financial security, he said, "Lindsay, financial security for me is being able to afford Happy Joe's pizza twice a year for my kid's birthday." Another gentleman who was in a manufactured housing community said that he was choosing between paying for his rent and keeping his mobile home or paying for his insulin, which would, keep his foot, essentially. Those were the kinds of impossible choices that a lot of the families on the doors that I knocked. And then, Connie, I went to the Capitol. It's, my first week at the Capitol, and I'm being introduced to the lobbyist for this big corporation and that big corporation and the big pharmaceutical companies and the insurance healthcare industry and, all of these big entities. And I started to look around the Capitol and I was like, where are the people who are advocating for the poor, the pushed aside, those on the margins of society? How do we make Interfaith Alliance exponentially more and larger? Because really, at the end of the day, the outsized influence of special interests in shaping our policy and the future of our state is significant. And there are way fewer people like, Connie and Interfaith Alliance and people who are really out there saying like, hey, no, we have to advocate for brain health. We have to advocate for good wages and livable wages and healthcare, for our residents. Like that is few and far between at the Capitol. You've got these big entities. And so I think what I hope people are hearing is a deepening sense of call, if you will, to the commitment to advocacy. Because if you are not there making your voice known on behalf of those who are on the margins, then there's no one else. It's the Democrats, certainly, but we, the importance of having advocates to do that alongside of us is what will make a real difference. So I'd say, thank you for that work. And here's the two things that I would recommend you consider. The Rolodexing piece we already talked about. So Rolodex whoever all your networks, and be brave as you're having conversations with them and getting them connected to the advocacy process. And then I would say the second thing is we need people of faith who are deeply committed to their values and their faith commitments running for office at all levels. So I would say consider run for office, whether that is a local board, commission, whether that's school board, city council, state representative. I want to work with you. So come work with me at the State House. And I would say just consider how you can be shaping the sphere of influence that you're in every single day. So that would be kind of my thoughts on, continuing to deepen your involvement in advocacy work in our state.
That is amazing. And if you can't see the comments, your colleague, State Representative Molly Donahue, is on, and she tells you her campaign motto is people first. And then she also is telling you nice job. So
thank you, Molly. It was a privilege to work on.
Lots of other good comments as well. But Representative Lindsay James, House Minority Whip, thank you so much for spending time with me. And if folks haven't figured out how amazing you are through this conversation, then they should listen again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your insights and your energy and your knowledge and your experience that you share through your faith and through your work at the legislature is really wonderful, and I'm grateful for all that you do. So, and so folks who are watching, also, thank you for watching. We appreciate you spending time with us. If you are new to Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, you obviously can find us on Facebook and YouTube, but we also are on Instagram and Twitter, or you can learn more about us at our website, interfaithallianceiowa.org. Behind the scenes, magically putting comments up is Kristen Clark, and I always appreciate her work as well. And so thank you, Representative James, appreciate it. I always tell folks that if you are not registered to vote, please do register to vote. And if you already are registered to vote, please find someone and help them register to vote. It matters in our democracy to have everybody engaged in voting and in the work. And for now, please take care, be well, and have a wonderful week. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.